All right. Good morning. This is Justin with ReefNation. We're here with Jim and Claire from Step Ahead Innovations, specifically talking about the Mindstream device that they're bringing to the reef aquarium market. Know most reef aquarists who have seen the posts over the last year or two about their product have been excited and confused and, is this too good to be true? And we're here with Jim today to talk a little bit about, just kind of the device, their background, and hear a little bit about how it works. So good morning, Jim.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
So we appreciate you joining us this morning, and looks like you got a lot going on behind you there. So we got maybe a little tour of what we have happening there?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Hold on a second here. Let me grab my my camera here.
So this all pertains to how the Mindstream works and how you guys test it and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. So first of all, let me get a back view here of the my desktop area. So what I have here is test equipment and a test chamber that we're using to do some validation on the Mindstream system.
Interesting.
The equipment that you see right here, these two instruments, are made by a company called Sunburst Sensors. Sunburst actually just won the X Prize for oceanography for pH sensing as the most accurate pH sensor available. Above it here is a lab peristaltic pump that we use. And then the test chamber here, this is a home brew that we've made that allows us to control the conditions that the water is in. So we can regulate the temperature, we can control the gases going in and out of the test chamber. If we want to add more CO2 or remove CO2, we can. You can see the Mindstream sitting in the background right now doing a bit of, actually it's not doing a measurement cycle at the moment, but it's always keeping the disc in motion so that it accomplishes two things. It keeps the water fresh underneath where the sensors are.
Interesting. That makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if it were to sit still for the 15-minute intervals between measurements, you wouldn't have a fresh sample of water underneath it. But the second purpose of that spinning disc is it keeps snails and other things from actually climbing onto it. We found the hard way that if in the beginning of our research, if we left it sitting still, we had a lot of joyriders that would climb on and go for a spin whenever it started up.
The merry-go-round, huh?
Yes. Yeah. So, and then on the back over here, we've got another bench with another computer and some equipment for some spectrometers and stuff. I don't know if my cord is long enough to reach here, but I have up on the screen over here a little dashboard that basically shows me the status of the monitors that are running in various locations. But I'll have to, unfortunately, my cord isn't long enough to get there. I'll have to try and set up a little bit later on this computer here so that we can actually see what the dashboard looks like.
Interesting. So all that stuff is used to kind of calibrate, and as you guys are doing your research for the device, to make sure that everything's as accurate as possible and is calibrated correctly.
Yeah, and the other thing, there's a lot of other aspects to the system too that we're constantly monitoring, which is Wi-Fi connectivity, the reliability of the Wi-Fi, whether the cloud servers are ever down, are there service interruptions. So it's a lot more than just doing the the chemistry tests. There's quite a few other elements to the system.
Interesting. Yeah, is the plan, there's a great core of things that this device tests for today. Is the plan to see kind of get that core to the market, and then, as we've seen other, reef monitors do, kind of build on that as time goes on?
Yeah, at first, with the discs are actually, I wouldn't say future-proof, but they have a lot of expansion capabilities. The current configuration right now, we have positions for 11 sensors on the disk. And one of the positions, what we call our 12th position, is actually a cleaning brush. The cleaning brush is used to wipe the lens off every rotation. So that's a way of keeping, at least on the monitor optics side, it keeps it clean. It wipes off also the conductivity electrodes so that they're always clean.
Interesting. So how did you get into this stuff? This is you're neck deep in the aquarium chemistry hobby. It appears here. What was your path to working on this stuff?
Well, the irony was I only had one chemistry course back in college, so I was certainly not a chemist, and I don't even pretend to be a chemist at this point either. But my
You're doing
background,
pretty good with all that stuff in the background, to be honest.
Yeah, well, trial by fire here. It came about. My background is originally electrical engineering and wireless communications. So my first company was a company called LPA Design, and it went on to become the largest manufacturer of wireless controls for camera lighting equipment. So if you wanted to do remote control of cameras or flashes, or video equipment, under a brand called Pocket Wizard. And so that company grew through the years to a decent size. But 20 years of working in the photo industry, you start to get a little bit of burnout. And with the opportunity knocking at my door as I kept looking and seeing voids in what was really needed in solving my aquarium problems, I couldn't resist the urge to dive in and try something new. Sure. So I literally did. I took the big dive.
So you're an aquarist as well. Are you freshwater, saltwater? Tell us about your history there.
Yeah, mostly freshwater. And I kept telling myself, my wife wants saltwater, but I said, oh, it's way too complicated, honey. I said, until we can figure out even how to keep a freshwater fish alive, we probably shouldn't, dive into that. So the project originally did start as a freshwater monitor, but as we progressed, we started finding it was actually going to be less challenging to do it for seawater because the range of variations in seawater are much smaller than the range and variations that you can see in freshwater systems. Yeah, so it also happened to coincide that some of the sensors that were available first to us had a better overlap with what was needed for seawater, and so we decided to focus. Obviously, it's a segment that's got a higher demand as far as the need for monitoring is, the marine aquarium hobby, particularly, for coral growers. So we decided to, put our primary focus into that segment first. I do hope to, before long, loop back and finish off a version of the system also for the freshwater aquarists as well. Very similar hardware would be used, but different sets of sensors on the disk.
Interesting. Yeah, I would imagine with all the things going on in the world's oceans, the sensor side of things, there for you guys to do calibration and testing and development is probably pretty rich nowadays. Yeah. For good or for bad, right?
Yeah. Well, also a lot of the sensors that we use come from medical applications, and so that was also one of the things that made us feel a little bit more confident in the technology being, more sound and robust. We knew that there were some applications where these things were in use in the hundreds of millions of units a year to do blood or urine analysis. So, knowing that it's got that much history behind the sensor technology, that, we weren't taking that big a gamble in, making the assumptions of moving it into the aquarium hobby.
Interesting. Yeah, and there's obviously there's a lot of sensors and things that we've all worked with over the last probably 10 or 12 years or so. in the generic sense, which, the controllers and things that we've typically used on reef aquariums, typically the probes and things of that nature came from other industries as well. How do you see, Mindstream really playing in a market where, the hardcore people have some sort of device today? What do you see as kind of the angle there?
Well, at some point, we certainly see our system, tying in, to other systems as well. That's a part of our strategy for long term. We certainly don't have the human resources near term, however, to be entertaining all the doors that have been getting knocked recently.
I would imagine.
Yeah. So we're well aware that there's definitely a desire to bridge between different platforms, and I do believe that's going to be a possibility. But we just haven't had the time to get into the real details as to what kind of structure needs to be worked out to do that.
Sure. Yeah, and I had seen some of the early releases from your side on how things actually work. I mean, so it's light is what we're dealing with, correct? As far as how the sensors are picking up the different water parameters. Maybe
Correct.
you could explain a little bit about how that works.
Well, in the general principles of fluorescence, you take one light source. Typically, it's a UV light source or a blue light source, and when the light shines onto a fluorescent object, that light gets absorbed into a dye molecule. The dye molecule essentially becomes sort of unstable and will eventually release that photon back out, but puts it out at another wavelength. So in the examples of the Mindstream, most of our system works off of blue light entering a dye, and then depending on the stability of that dye, it will eventually release green light or red light in response. And so what we're looking for is we're measuring the amount of green or red that returns bouncing back off of the sensors. And the strength of those signals of the green or the red, tells us basically the strength of the parameter in the water.
Interesting. So as the disk goes around, does each parameter have its own spot on the disk, or are some things calculated from other values?
Several of the sensors on the disk are unique parameters. Like the pH is a unique parameter, calcium is a unique parameter, potassium, CO2. But alkalinity is the primary parameter that we have, where it's derived through sets of equations that are established by ocean researchers as to the math models that best fit the description for alkalinity in seawater. So it's not a true measurement in the same way as you would consider a titration method. Mm-hmm. And there are some drawbacks to this, that if someone were to have very high levels of like boric acid or something in their aquarium that would be out of the norm for standard seawater, then our math may not fully account for that. So we rely on people using the typical salts.
Interesting. So there's a potential for the equations to basically get a little hairy as far as random variables that may not occur in seawater.
Yeah. So I mean, as an example, alkalinity typically has well into the 90+% range of it being a carbonate alkalinity, mm-hmm. And a couple percent of the alkalinity is made up by much smaller little constituents within the water. So as long as people are using typical aquarium salts, the assumptions hold fairly well and accurate. But if people start trying to homebrew their own salts and make things at random, then it could start to get a little bit more in error.
Interesting. Yeah, we find reefers dosing all sorts of interesting things in their aquariums out there. Hopefully, I don't know. It sounded like some of the ones you mentioned there would be pretty harmful to existing things that are in the tank as far as the borates and things. So as these discs go around, I saw it spinning there, and when you showed us the example, does that they get replaced about every month or so? Is that kind of how the cycle works?
So the discs basically are I should say, the discs age based on two primary factors. One of them is exposure to light. So every time we take and shine a light pulse onto the disc, that degrades the sensor just a little bit. And so depending on how often the light pulses are used to take the readings determines the aging speed of the disc. But then on top of that, there are some other factors that can come into play. Biological growth is inevitable in things in the aquarium. We've seen that over a 1 month period, that in any of the aquariums we've tried, it's been fairly clean for at least a month. We've seen some aquarium situations where it could last maybe several months of time without the need for cleaning. It really is something that's going to be user specific and tank specific as to the conditions. So we rate it as a 1 month because we're comfortable that over that time you're not going to get enough biological growth to factor into this. But people need to experiment with their own tanks and after a month experiment, see if things look like they are still correct. Start pulling out your test kits, so forth, and just see. You may find that you can get a longer time out of it. We just don't have the ability to have knowledge on everyone's individual tank as to what the likelihood is.
Sure. And is the procedure then basically to just take it out like we do with many other things in the aquariums and give it a little scrubbing and a little bit of cleaning there once every couple months, or when we see it start to get some growth on it?
If you do see that there's any indications of growth, and there are some software things that will actually help the aquarist with knowing that as well. Each of the little optical reader heads has 4 LEDs taking measurements from different angles. And if each of the different angles that it shines the light onto the sensor doesn't match, it knows that something must be starting to foul on one of the surfaces. So we can give an indication that it may be time to do a rinse and wash your disc. You can do it in DI water or even salt water for that matter, just a bucket of salt water. Nothing abrasive, but just a very soft sponge. I actually use my finger, very lightly rub the surface, and it wipes off anything that might have built up onto it. So the disc is cleanable, but that'll affect and it'll help when you've got a biological element there. But if it's a photo bleaching element, due to just the disc has been used for a long time and it's had a lot of readings taken, then that's a non-reversible. That can't be repaired by just washing. And that's ultimately the thing that determines the final life of the disc.
Time to replace it. Okay. So maybe we could just segue into kind of I'm just picturing a day in the life, right? So we have this set up. It looks like it would be something you'd mount either in an overflow or in your sump, as far as people that have those things on their tank.
So it can go either in the sump or in the main tank.
Okay.
There's for the most part, it's nicer to have it in the sump. There's a lot of advantages being there.
Sure.
And it's not a detractor to the beauty of the tank. But the one drawback that you get by being in the sump is you get a different reading potential for oxygen levels.
Mm-hmm.
So the main tank is going to typically be lower than in the sump, depending on where you placed your protein skimmer or other elements that might add oxygen to the water.
Interesting.
So you can get if a pump stops and you lose circulation, your main tank might have oxygen dive rather rapidly, but the sump will not see that. So you could get a false sense of security that you think everything's okay, unless you got some other backup system monitoring the pump functions.
Sure.
So that's why, at least initially, we were recommending for maximum protection. People should try and put it in the main aquarium itself, the most representative of the environment that the fish are in.